presentation. All right, so can everybody see my screen?
No.
Okay. No.
No, not yet.
No.
Okay, just hold on. All right, working.
Yes, we see it now.
Okay,
Yep.
awesome. So yeah, this is part 2 of the AI and UX design talk. And in this talk, I will share some of the big ideas that I believe to be the most immediately impactful and disruptive innovation for 2021 and beyond. And I want to start this with a quote from Steve Jobs. So he said, "Some people think design means how it looks, but of course, if you dig deeper, it's really how it works." And this quote is significant, and therefore AI as a tool itself suits user experience designing like a glove. Another quote that I want to read is from ARC, and it says, "While advances in hardware and software have been driving down AI training costs by 37% per year, the size of AI models is growing much faster, 10 times per year. As a result, total AI training costs continue to climb. We believe that state-of-the-art AI training model costs are likely to increase 100-fold from roughly 1 million today to more than 100 million by 2025. So this is a testimony of the industry scale and potential. It really is growing exponentially. As I actually mentioned before, research is just incredibly fast and rapid. So because this is part 2 of the AI and UX design talk, if you haven't yet seen the first part, I highly suggest you have a look at it. But just as a quick recap, we've discussed the designing principles to create platforms which makes use of artificial intelligence. So the 7 principles are, without going into too much depth, to differentiate the AI content visually, to explain how machines think, have the right expectations, handle weird edge cases, provide engineers with the right training data. And that's one of the most important actually when it comes to artificial intelligence. And then user testing for AI products, and also to provide an opportunity to give feedback. But as I mentioned, the training data is really important when it comes to artificial intelligence. So in the first talk, I gave this illustration or GIF or GIF about how I visualize artificial intelligence. So you can think of AI as a landscape designer, only on a macro scale. So we can imagine that the consolidation of all these gradients and vectors that we see here serve as a mountain range, which will guide the balls to flow where it should roll to. So in essence, these balls are, we can think of it like water, okay? And that would represent the input data that we give our AI model. So the resting place, as we can see there at the top, and there's one at the bottom, would represent the output, or rather the prediction that the AI model makes. So ultimately, it depends on where the input, the balls are being released in order to predict where it would flow. So this is why AI is such a dynamic form of software. It really trains and adjusts itself. So just like a mountain range, if water keeps on flowing down the mountain range, so hypothetically, let's say it rains, and it will ultimately go down to the lake, okay? Now, the more that it rains, the more roots it will make in the mountain, ultimately reshaping the mountain. And then when new water flows, it will always go down those specific routes. So that's a very similar kind of analogy to AI, except that we as users or designers of AI can move that lake. We can tell it where to go, where to flow, and then the AI will adjust the mountain range. So I discussed this in part 1 in a bit more detail, but I would just like to give this visualization just to, we are designers at heart and we are visual people. So back to part 2, okay? So the bigger picture of AI, Seeing that artificial intelligence is the most promising and one of the leading technological advancements in our generation, it's important to have a good grasp on what it entails, what it is, what it's not, and how we can use and develop it further as user experience designers. And the most important principle is deep learning. Well, it's not really a principle, but it's really important to understand what it is. So the Google definition is deep learning is an artificial intelligence AI function that imitates the workings of the human brain in processing data and creating patterns for use in decision making. So deep learning could be the most important software breakthrough of our time. It is creating the next generation of computing platforms, while the leading innovations in business are actually chatbots, self-driving cars, and consumer apps. But there are really deep neural nets applications extends into almost every other industry. It really goes into e-commerce, communication, human resource management, all of the above. It's really an applicable software, and it's very dynamic and useful. So, excuse me, I would like to interrupt myself actually here and just talk about a fun study about facial recognition, seeing that we're talking about the applications on business. So a study about facial recognition has been conducted in China to pay with a smile in order to avoid the excessive use of terminals and buttons. So you go to the teller and you smile, and the camera sees that, and that means you want to pay. It's kind of the equivalent of a tap, or old school, put in your password. But the problem with this is the user's paradigm. They don't quite understand it. People don't get it. So I'm mentioning this to keep in mind that sometimes these advancements in AI and UX might actually not work due to people not being used to fundamental changes of interactions between themselves and interfaces. And that's also important to keep in mind. So one specific business application I want to touch on is Google's reCAPTCHA, which they use to train their self-driving cars. Now, not a lot of people know this, but every time you click where the traffic lights are, you are actually training an AI model to help Google with their self-driving cars. Now, CAPTCHA stands for Completely Automated Public Turing Test, to tell computers and humans apart. I'm sure everybody knows this and is already a bit annoyed just to see this image. Knowing that CAPTCHA is UX's worst nightmare due to rising irritations and interruptions during the user experience, this is an example of how to gather training data. And as I mentioned earlier, training data is very important. And with a bit of manipulation, UX designers can become creative to implement similar ideas into their designs in order to continuously improve user experience over time. So as a UX designer, it's crucial to understand and be aware of these algorithms. I want to share what I've learned here in order to spark your creativity of how to use and integrate AI into your work. So an interesting invention from MIT, this is really crazy. If you go into the math, when I read about this, I felt like a child. I'm very excited, but it's MIT, and MIT created an adaptive liquid neural network that could improve decision-making in self-driving cars and also medical diagnosis, actually. Now, the crazy fact is that it only has 302 neurons in its entire nervous system, but yet it can generate unexpectedly complex dynamics. How this works is the algorithm adjusts to changes experienced by real-world systems by changing the underlying equations as they receive new data. So as you receive new data, the underlying equations are changed and adapted. They structured the neural network so that the parameters can change over time based on the result of a nested set of differential equations. So ultimately, this allows it to continue learning after the training phase. And that's the breakthrough part. It can continue learning after the training set has been inputted and the phase is over, and making it this makes it more resilient to unexpected situations, like in this situation, heavy rain covering the camera, for example. So just before I go into user experience, deep learning versus the internet, just to give some perspective. Perhaps the biggest bold estimate during my research in the reports is that deep learning could create more economic value than the internet did. That's crazy. So ARC believes that deep learning will add $30 trillion to the equity market capitalizations during the next 15 to 20 years. Just let that sink in. So let's go back to user experience. We will look at two things: behavior predictions and AI-assisted designing. Okay. Now, if we go into behavior predictions, the suggested tool is attract diff. So it's not really an AI tool. However, it is a good tool to kind of use to better predict or to get a better idea of the attractiveness of your application. So with behavior predictions, emotion recognition to better track what is going on during UX testing and studies is not possible right now because it is very confusing and messy due to the vast range of possible inputs. However, artificial intelligence aided design focuses on the rational use of AI technology to measure and improve UX, since conventional data collection methods such as user interview or user observation for user behavior data are inefficient and it's very time consuming. So the goal of this proposed methodology is to make the deep neural network model simulate the user's experience in the process of operating an application as much as possible. So we are training AI to have a user experience, or at least to mimic a user experience. So if we were to quantify and measure user experience, how would we go about it? This is where I really had to restrict myself because it's very technical and you can really easily get lost in the technicalities. I found all this information in a research study, but I'm gonna really simplify it and break it into smaller pieces, and I won't spend too much time on it. However, I think it is important just to touch on the technical side of things. So if we want to measure user experience, because ultimately artificial intelligence is pure math, it's statistics, it's numbers, there's no subjectivity really. When you go into the back end, it's numbers, and now we need to quantify an experience. So that's a very difficult thing to do. However, in this research study, they found a way to do that. So you look at the click behavior, and then you build a machine experience model. So the click behavior of the users measures user experience from the click behavior of the user when they operate the application. In other words, where the user is clicking, as simple as that. Click models aim to extract accurate relevance feedback from the noisy and biased user clicks. It is also important to test the reliability and accuracy of a click model's correlation estimations. Now, click logs can provide a valuable source of relevant information. However, the probability of a click is affected by the position of the document, which brings a lot of deviation to the establishment of a click model. Also, considering varying screen sizes, click locations cannot be accurately placed. In other words, click models are fragile, okay? But with the aid of artificial intelligence, the performance is greatly enhanced. So onto the second step, machine experience model. They call it a MEM. So MEM corresponds with the 3 levels of human brain activity. Okay, so how does that work? This is basically how it works. We design and use projected pages of applications to train neural networks for specific tasks. So these projected pages consist of the click information of all users in the process of completing a certain task. And here on the left, you can see that user one, they first clicked on the green, then blue, then purple, pink, darker pink. So you can see that we collect all that data when someone is doing a very specific task. Thus, features of user behavior can be aggregated and mapped in the connection layers and the hidden layers of the neural network. Finally, the optimized design is executed on the application to verify the efficiency of the proposed methodology. So it's believed that deep neural networks can understand user experience better through behavioral data, which makes use of the user's logs. And that also actually makes sense. If you want to understand user experience, the data that you need to use would be behavioral data. It's very interesting to actually see how they conducted the study. So in conclusion, with the assistance of deep neural network models trained by user behavior data, the application's versions can be determined efficiently and accurately in A/B testing. All right, as always. Now onto AI design assistance. Everybody can design something, okay? Finally, the assistance of AI whilst designing, I just want to mention some quick examples. So Instagram, Snapchat, or any other popular image sharing platform, AI maps rabbit ears on our face to share it in stories and short clips instantly. It's an instantaneous design with a click of a button, and therefore anybody can design something. Another good example is Adobe Photoshop, or Adobe Photoshop, depends on how you want to pronounce it. But it can retouch an image with only one click by using artificial intelligence, as I'm sure most of you know. Now, logo makers can create a logo in seconds that fits their brand and design language and suggest to you, based on your data, additional colors and fonts, which is, it's really great to work with that. Furthermore, AI-based website generators can throw out a ready-to-roll-out website within a few steps. So I actually didn't put this in the presentation, but I remembered that there is this one website where you can actually just describe the front end that you want, and simply by typing it, simply saying, I want a website with a dark themed website with a big, bold title reading this, and then the rest of the site I want to be modern and clean. And then based off of that, it will create CSS, it will create HTML, and there you go. It's really crazy just to think about it. And as a web developer, it actually makes me a bit anxious, but it's a great tool to use. And because we still need decision making in that process, I'm not too anxious, but it's incredible where we're going. And this actually leads me to the I lead, you follow principle. So understanding user experience of co-creation with artificial intelligence. So when you create something with artificial intelligence, how will it work? Okay, now this image on the left, I'm sorry, it looks a bit meme-ish, but we all are familiar with the boss leader image. I'm sure at every workplace, there's at least something like this. But then the engineer, and that's a joke, you just make a car. And I feel like that's the same thing with AI. It's kind of, you know, you're just getting past that hurdle. The time consuming factor will be made very efficient, and then all the other aspects of the designing process where decision making is necessary, you will still be part of. That's how I see it, and also some of the articles I read. So they did a study to, and actually a product as well, where you have AI while you're designing something. So it's that co-creation we spoke about. Now, the 5 AI functions, they call it duet drawing, is to draw the rest of an object, drawing an object similar to the previous object, drawing an object that matches previous objects, finding empty space, and colorizing. Okay, so drawing the rest of an object, which enables the AI to automatically complete an object that the user has drawn. So when a user stops drawing an object, this function enables the AI to immediately draw the rest of the object. And I played with this. It's really crazy. You're drawing a stick man, and it detects that you're drawing that, and it gives you a suggestion, and you just click on it, and it finishes the job for you. Now, drawing an object similar to a previous object, this function enables the AI to draw the same object that a user has just drawn in a slightly different form. So the object is drawn to the right of the existing object and at the same scale. This would be useful if you're into VFX or any CGI. When you create a crowd, all the people can't really look the same, but it's kind of the same drawing, you know? So now AI comes in, it detects that, okay, it should be kind of similar, but not exactly, and it just makes a bit of realistic tweaks, and there you have it. So that is also a very useful time-saving function. Then drawing an object that matches previous objects, this function enables the AI to draw another object that matches the objects a user has just drawn. A clipboard-like object is drawn on the canvas considering the other object's position. This is very similar to the first function, but it's just a bit different because it's clipboard, and I don't really find this personally very useful. However, it is there. Maybe I just can't find the function for that. And then finding an empty space, this is very interesting on a canvas. So this obviously enables the AI to find and display an empty space on the canvas, but it's implemented by devising an algorithm finding the space where the biggest circle can be drawn without overlapping with the drawn objects. And then colorizing sketches with recommended colors enables the AI to colorize sketches based on the user's color palette or choices. When the user chooses colors from the palette and marks them on each object with a line, this function automatically paints the entire picture according to the colors. It is implemented by using Paint's Chainer. It's a convolutional neural network based line drawing colorizer. So yeah, I just want to mention this because it is out there and it's being developed, and I really think that these functions will be useful in designing. So especially when you co-create with artificial intelligence. Now, this concluded, so as I said, they did an experiment and then they actually created a product. But the conclusion of the experiment, and as user experience designers, the conclusion is really actually what we're interested in. What have they learned? What do people like? What do people not like when making an AI platform for people to co-create with? So the users were significantly more content with DuetDraw when the tool gave detailed instructions. This does seem a bit obvious, but in the AI world, you kind of want to automate as much as possible, but the detailed instructions such as dialogue, modal windows, alerts, it can help users to complete the task and reach their goals more quickly and easily and direct users' attention to the task. However, they can frustrate users when they are wrong or when they interrupt users' performance. Now, given these advantages and disadvantages, it is important to design an appropriate communication style in accordance with the characteristics of each interface. So it's very important to keep that in mind. So the second point is, while users always wanted to lead the task, they also wanted the AI to explain its intentions, but only when the users wanted it to do so. So in the context of user AI interfaces, especially those in which users and AI closely collaborate, the communication issue is also significant. AI algorithms are often considered black boxes, and I spoke about this in part 1. It really is like a black box. It is difficult to convey their operational processes and principles to users, but in this case, you kind of want to. So thus, it is important to identify the appropriate communication method to enhance the user experience of novice interface users. Further studies, yeah, I want to mention this. So further studies have been conducted on how to take the initiative with an agent when arranging collaboration between users and computers. In designing interfaces in which users and AI collaborate in creative work, the initiative issue could also be a critical factor. Who takes initiative? Is it you? Is it the AI? Since creative work has been considered human-specific, it is important to understand humans' perceptions of initiative in collaborating with AI and consider them in design. So basically what that tells us is that if we design a platform where users and artificial intelligence will co-collaborate, it's important to keep in mind that the human wants to feel as if they're leading, as if they are the boss of this operation, and they need to be able to take initiative. And this leads me to my conclusion. The CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, I hope I'm saying that right, explained that humans have the creativity, empathy, emotion, physicality, and insight, which can be mixed with powerful AI computation. Instead of working against each other, humans should work together with machines to solve society's greatest challenges. So UX design will employ more artificial intelligence than it did in the past, and therefore will change what user experience people will have to do. It is simply letting go of control that makes us feel unsafe. It really is. And also, don't assume that just because it is AI, we don't need any UX designers. Actually, we would need more of them because we need a deeper understanding of both the person and the problem before we can apply any AI methods to partially solve the problem even. The types of user experience work will increase and thus need more people to guide and create it. Now, I'm going to finish with a quote which reads, AI will shift the designer to be a creative director. That will shift the focus from creating to decision-making, but no AI will supplant decision-making. And that is the presentation. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Llewellyn. I enjoyed that a lot. Like we did the last time, if anybody has any questions, you can just pop it in our chat over here, and we'll get to the questions in our next session. So yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, I'll just leave it here. Do you guys want to still chat a bit? We did finish a little bit earlier than expected.
It was 30 minutes, was it not?
Yeah, you did well on the dot.
Okay. I really tried to cut it down.